About the world. He has given voice to the inspiration of people for peace and justice in the four corners of the world. Numerous awards, too many to mention. Help me welcome my distinguished guest. I would like to say Sir Harry Belafonte.
Don't be too hasty.
Mr. Belafonte, it is my extreme honor and pleasure. First, welcome to Caribbean TV.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
My first question to you, sir, would be for the young kids, the young adults who don't know about Harry Belafonte. Would you do us the pleasure of educating us a little bit, if you will?
Well, I think the fuel that fed my public persona really came out of the arts. It was my interest in theater, my interest in becoming an actor, and evolving into a singer that eventually, through that process, captured the public's fancy and imagination. Mm-hmm. And I woke up one day and found that people were enjoying the offerings that I was making. Uh-huh. But it was a wonderful time because many young artists were coming along in the same period. Mm-hmm. People like Sidney Poitier and
yes.
Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee. And there were a lot of young singers who are beginning to evidence themselves on the horizon of American culture.
Mm-hmm. We enjoy the singing, the Deo. What happened to the singing? Not anymore.
Well, I had sung for 60 years of my life. Excuse me. And in that time, many things had changed. Mm-hmm. The world was evolving into a vast place of curiosity and interest. And the process of trying to do certain works musically and certain works theatrically were just really quite difficult.
I see.
You don't find an easy road in the world of communication to audiences. Radio is by and large cut off from the audiences that I would like to play to. Mm-hmm. They don't play your records if you're not in line with the flavor of the day.
Format, yes.
and I think the same thing goes for film. It's a very narrow prism in which we are able to work. And I just decided that rather than waste time and energy looking to compete in those markets, that I'd move on to other things and other interests.
I see. I'd like to go back a little bit. I'd like for you to talk, if you will, sir, about when did you meet Dr. Martin Luther King, and why did you get involved in the civil rights movement?
Well, I met Dr. King back in 1956, I think it was. And it was just at the dawning of the civil rights movement. Much had been going on in America to try to change the social and political condition of black people in America. And one day, Dr. King reached out to me. He called me on the phone and told me who he was. I had already known. And when he came to visit, we began to talk about the course of history that he had embarked upon, and whether or not I would be willing to be a part of that journey. After the hours that we spent talking about his view and the mission, I'd come to understand that I was not only willing to serve him, but I was willing to be an intricate part of the process through the coming years. I had no idea at that time, nor did he, that our movement would have turned into so large and so profound a social event. But it did, and I am most enriched for that opportunity, as well as the pleasure of serving not only with Dr. King, but with a host of other remarkable men and women who made up our movement. I really believe it was an obligation and a responsibility that we all had, and that we all still have.
I see. Which brings me to the next question. Do you think the dream of Dr. King will ever be accomplished in this country?
Well, I don't think it's possible to stop hoping, to stop dreaming. If there was no hope, if there was no dream, then what's the point of existence? So to a great degree, I'm committed to the idea that his principles, his values, what he saw for our humanity is something worth pursuing.
I see, sir.
That it will one day be achieved, but we have to understand that it's a long process.
Long process. What do you want most for our people? What would you like to see?
I would like for peoples of Africa and the African diaspora to become more understanding and more committed to who they are, committed to their history, committed to the understanding that they do have power.
That's right.
That they do have resources. They do have the opportunity to make change, and for them to stop thinking and feeling that somewhere there exists a leader and that we're waiting for that great moment of deliverance through some image that will appear on the horizon. I think we have to understand that those things that we need to extricate us from oppression sit within our own communities, sit within our own capacity. After all, if you really look back at history, that is how our leaders have always emerged out of the midst of our ranks. Dr. King came out of our soil, came out of our community. So did Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker, and so did Harriet Tubman, and so did Frederick Douglass, and so did Marcus Garvey, and so did a host of people who were liberators. They came from within our ranks. They didn't just appear on the horizon. And I think people have to stop relying on divine intervention,
or waiting for some
great Messiah. I don't think it happens that way. It comes from within us, and within us sits that greatness, and we just have to be willing to expose ourselves to it.
Here's one of the questions I really, really want to ask: who most influenced your life?
My mother, first of all, had huge.
I like that. I really do.
Huge involvement of creating my value system and my experiences. But from outside of the family unit, there were two men who were most impacting on my life. One was a great American artist and intellectual and courageous warrior by the name of Paul Robeson. And the other was a man by the name of Dr. W.B. Du Bois, who was a great educator and intellectual. There were many others along the way, but they were the most critical and the most influential in the beginning of my earliest outreach for ideas about where to go and what to do with my life.
The next question for you, sir, would be, what is your life's purpose? What do you think you're here for?
I think the question of why are we here is constantly being evoked, but I think that my purpose in life is really to be of service to humanity. You live in a community, you live with others. In that connectedness, we should be able to build a society of joy and hope and plenty. We should tend to our children and to the generations that we bring into the world, and try to instill in them a sense of hope, instill in them a sense of how much joy there is really in the world in which we live, and that we should try to not only pursue that joy, but to protect it when we find it.
That's right. That's right. I want to go back a little bit, if you will, to Jamaica. Do you still visit Jamaica? I see this question with just some smiles.
Well, I visit Jamaica with great regularity. I've never left my roots. I go there consistently. I've just been there recently, and I'm going back again almost immediately. In August, there will be a great celebration for the peoples of the parish of St. Anne, which is where I grew up. I was born in Harlem because my mother was a woman of she was an immigrant here in America from Jamaica, but she took me when I was a year and a half back to her community
I see.
in Abuka up in St. Anne,
Oh, St.
Jamaica.
Anne's. Okay.
And that's where I grew up for the first 12 years of my life. But I go to Jamaica quite often. I worked a lot with for Jamaican independence. I worked a lot with Michael Manley.
Yes.
And the gifts that he brought with men like P.J. Patterson. And also the fact that I sit on the board of the foundation for the University of the West Indies.
Ah, you don't? Oh, okay.
Yes, and
Wonderful.
with people like Rex Netterford.
Rex, yes, I do know him.
Yeah, he and I are very close. We do a lot of work together for the students of the region, and particularly for the campus at Mona in Kingston.
What would you like to say to the people of Jamaica?
That I love you dearly, that so much of my history and what I do is rooted in Jamaican history and Jamaican culture. After all the songs that I sang, Down the Way Where the Nights Are Gay, and Deo, and Matilda.
Oh, that's right, Matilda.
All those songs are rooted in the Caribbean culture, and all came from my exposures as a child living in St. Anne and in Kingston. But I am very much a Jamaican.
Very good. I'd like to ask about Barberly. Congressman Barberly introduced a bill to Congress to recognize June as Caribbean American Heritage Month, basically to acknowledge and recognize the contribution that folks from the Caribbean has made to the United States. You were one of the names that topped the list. How do you feel about June is Caribbean Heritage Month? It is now passed. The proclamation came from the President of the United States, June 5th, so we do now have a month to celebrate the contribution. How do you feel about it?
Well, I think that for all Americans, it permits American people, black and white and others, to focus on the magnificence that sits within the mosaic of what makes America such a curious and a remarkable place in which to live. I think I think that every culture, every geographical region should be represented in some celebration within the American scheme of things. We should have more sensitivity to the things that we found here with Native Americans, and certainly with Black Americans we have African American History Month and things like that. But for Caribbeans, I think we made a great contribution to this nation. The Haitian people did much to fight for American independence and helped us in the war against Spain, which did much to liberate this country. Many Caribbeans have contributed much to the joy of American culture and to American intellectual growth. And I think it's important for people to know that, and for us to have an opportunity as well to celebrate ourselves.
That's a good thing. What are current projects? What are you doing now? What are you working on?
Well, I just recently completed a film called Bobby that I made. Yes, with.
I'm just surprised. That's all.
No, I make films.
That is great.
I make films often. I did this film with Anthony Hopkins and with Lawrence Fishburne and others, directed by Emilio Estevez. It is a story about Bobby Kennedy and the day of his assassination. And I'm also producing a musical event for the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. called The Long Road. It looks at the history of Black America through the music of Black America. It was produced as a body of work done as a CD, a box set, and now they have commissioned it to be done as a performance piece. And I'm currently making a documentary on my life, which is full-blown and well on the way, and I go on and on.
And this is something quite exciting. About the documentary about your life, do you know when that will be released, will be out there?
Well, they've set the date for 2008. We have another 18 months in which to shoot and to edit And then at that time, we'll be releasing it as first as a feature. Comes out as a feature film in the theaters of America, and then it's going to be released as a long-form television presentation, and then it goes into an even longer form through the internet, and then through the use of DVD.
I see. Is any part of it being done in Jamaica or the Caribbean anywhere?
Oh, there's a large part of it that was shot in the Caribbean. It will reflect my Caribbean roots, but it's about the civil rights movement, my relationship with Africa and Nelson Mandela. A lot of the celebrated voices of the 20th century are reflected in the piece. There's a long interview with Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu and certain heads of state. A lot takes me into the culture of Africa. We shot a lot of film footage with Miriam Makeba and a lot of other African artists. The work that I do with the United Nations is in the film as well. And also a lot of the history of my own work as an artist, my films and songs. It's all in that story.
Let's talk a little bit about, if we will, about the work that you do in Africa.
Well, much of the work that I did in Africa and do in Africa is really around African development. It started with my work in the Peace Corps as one of the advisors to President John Kennedy. We used the Peace Corps to help send American technology and American a lot of our young men and women who came out of the university, and some of our elder citizens as well, went to Africa in order to help people in the developmental process. I also encouraged Americans to go and to do that work, not just because of the help they would bring to Africa, but because as Americans they had come back more enriched about what was going on in the developing world and be able to instruct their own communities about the power and the beauty of diversity. But I also then, when I put together a project called We Are the World, where we sang to the cause of relief for the African famine, I got caught in looking at the work that was done by a lot of non-governmental organizations. And UNICEF in the UN was one of them. And what I did with, I was invited to become part of the United Nations Children's Fund. And for the last 20-odd years, I've worked in that capacity, going to Africa quite regularly. I spent a lot of time in Africa during the Rwandan Holocaust, during the upheavals in the Congo, do a lot of work with HIV/AIDS, not only in Africa but in the Caribbean region as well. And in this work, I am constantly being exposed to the needs of the continent. And I go around the world doing advocacy for Africa and the Caribbean. And it's very rewarding work.
That's good. And again, we thank you, sir. One thing that Harry Belafonte would like to do and have not yet done?
No, I just like to continue doing what I've done, but finding ways in which to do it better.
I want to move to, what legacy would you like to leave behind?
The fact that the human species has been given a lot with which to work. We're the most, at least we consider ourselves to be the most advanced of all species.
Yes.
And we seem to have a capacity to go places and to glean knowledge and information about our universe to a degree that other creatures are not able to do. And for us to take that endowment, to take that capacity and use it to the best interests of our development as a people, to try to turn us away from war and conflict, to lessen our appetite for greed and for control, and begin to look at a universe that is far greater than we have been able to fully realize, and to understand that we can do it by lending ourselves to our mutual benefit, to care for one another more deeply than we do. And that's been my mission, and it's a mission that's rewarded me quite admirably.
Thank you, sir. Being one of the great minds of our time, it is not only a pleasure to enjoy your company and talk with you, but we look to you now for more knowledge. what advice or what would you say to the youths of today? We touched on it a little earlier, but I'd like in closing, if you would, just because it is so important to me, and I think to a lot of people, what can you then share with the youths of today, and not just the youths, but I think humanity, you've covered quite a bit, but just to go back and let's see if we can get it a little further in the brain there about, what advice would you give to the world?
Just that we must know that we're endowed with the capacity to make a difference, and that the only way that that difference will be made is for us to express the will to do it and to go out and do it. And I think that we all have a responsibility for the survival of our planet.
That's right.
Not just human life, but the way in which we've evolved as a species. We've destroyed a lot of nature, a lot of other creatures. Annually we're losing thousands of species of life just because of the mischief that we have done with pollution and greed and the way in which we have abused the land. So there's a lot to do, and I would just like to know that young people understand that it's their mandate, their responsibility to do these things and to get on with doing it.
Mr. Belafonte, I would like to take the time to not only thank you so much for the contribution that you have made to this country, the contribution, how much you have given of yourself to the Caribbean and to Jamaica. We want to thank you so much, and again, I thank you for joining us here on Caribbean TV. It is our sincere pleasure, and we do wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you, sir.